If you're looking to learn how to build better best ball lineups, then stick around for the IDP Plus Best Ball podcast. Welcome into the Draft Lab. I'm Joel Wirth, and this is the IDP Plus Best Ball podcast. Last week we talked about we did an introduction to best ball. So if you're new to best ball, go check that out. But hopefully you saw that. And if you're new, this is your first time getting into best ball, learning how to do it. Maybe you signed up with one of the sites. Maybe you started doing some drafting. Today, we're going to talk about how to build better lineups, how to build stronger, more robust lineups that can help you kind of navigate the seas of the mega multi-entry tournament, these big tournaments, so that you can be a shark instead of a fish in this ocean of giant tournaments. So there's a lot to talk about. So let's get right to it. The first thing is the same rule with any like fantasy league that you're going to join. The first rule is to understand the scoring and the roster builds and the roster requirements. So there's two main ones in these large mega multi-entry tournaments. We're talking primarily talking about DraftKings. We're talking about Underdog here. Roster size. So for Underdog on that Best Ball Mania tournament, that roster size is 18 player rosters. So in that case, I like to split five roster spots between my quarterback and my tight end, the singleton positions where you're only going to start one. Most of these tournaments, you're going to start one quarterback, and you start two running backs, three receivers, one flex, and then one tight end. So the quarterback and the tight end are your singleton positions where you can start one. You can also put a tight end in a flex, but you can only ever start one quarterback. So I like to split five roster spots between the two. And how I do that, how I allocate those positions depends on where I'm going early. If I'm going early tight end, say take a Brock Bowers in the second round, something like that, then I probably don't want to have it at a third tight end, right? I don't want to go digging deep into spending draft capital on a tight end later when I've got a guy who's probably going to be starting for me almost every week. At least I hope so. He better be if I'm spending that kind of draft capital on him, right? So I don't necessarily want a third tight end. I want to get another one who can cover a bye week, who can, be good enough to fill in if Bowers has a down week or something like Bowers, McBride, whatever elite tight end you want to take. But I don't want to be spending too much draft capital on a onesie position if I have an elite one. Same thing with the quarterback. If I take a Lamar Jackson early, if I take a Josh Allen early, something like that. Again, I probably only want to do quarterbacks, even though the third quarterback is going to hit your lineup more than you think. But again, in that case, if I'm spending that kind of draft capital on a quarterback in a position that I can only ever start once, or I can only ever start one per week, I don't want to spend too much draft capital on there. And we'll talk about what happens in these drafts a little bit. Right now, there's a big tier. There's a 4 to 5 quarterback tier that goes early in the third, fourth, fifth round. Then there's a big drop off down to like Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, something like that. And then there's another drop off. And then there's just a big tier of quarterbacks kind of in the middle. And then it's just kind of a feeding frenzy, right? Whoever doesn't have one, people are just going to jump up and go. So I don't want to be spending a whole lot of draft capital on that position where I can only ever start one if I have an elite one. Now, if I'm waiting, till, after pick 100, to get my first quarterback, Brock Purdy, a Jared Goff, a Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, something like that, I'm probably getting a quarterback who's not necessarily dynamic on the ground, not getting into a lot of rushing upside. So now they're going to be very dependent on passing touchdowns to be giving you their scoring. So now I probably want to have three because I want to be able to kind of mix and match and find one, have three shots, three bites at the apple every week to get a high scoring quarterback in there. So that's kind of the logic there of where I'm splitting where I'm splitting my draft capital between those two onesie positions. In an 18 player build, in a 20 player build, much more likely to go 3-3 and then three quarterbacks, three tight ends, and then either 7 receivers, 7 running backs, or 6-8, something like that, depending how the draft goes. But I'm almost always going to start or draft 3 quarterbacks and 3 tight ends, and then just kind of work from there. So that's kind of how I'm attacking the rosters. The scoring, there's two basic scoring formats. You're at half PPR and full PPR. Now, this is very, very critical that you kind of understand that half PPR is going to be lower. Obviously, it's going to be lower scoring than full PPR. Obviously, that just makes intuitive sense. But touchdowns become very important because it's lower scoring. Touchdowns are high scoring unit. So touchdowns become very important, and your quarterbacks become critical because they're your most consistent source of scoring. So it's really important that you have, like I said, either an elite quarterback that you can rely on every week, or kind of a myriad of quarterbacks, a bunch of them that you can rely on to give you a good score. You don't necessarily want to be waiting for till the back end for a rookie quarterback who may struggle early, may struggle an entire season, may not even get on the field. So it's really important to have quality quarterback play in half PPR. Cannot stress that enough. It's very important. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to go get one of the elites. You don't have to spend a third round pick on Josh Allen. And that's not necessarily, not that there's anything wrong with that. But you have, if you're going to win these tournaments, you have to have quality quarterback play. Doesn't matter where you get it from, but you have to have it. So if you love Bo Nix this year, cool, go get Bo Nix. If you love Baker Mayfield this year, cool, go get Baker Mayfield. But have a plan to have elite quarterback play because that's going to be really important. If you think Dak Prescott becomes a value this year because the George Pickens trade, that's great. Go get Dak Prescott. But make sure that you leave your draft with enough quality quarterback play to kind of anchor your lineup every week. It's very important. Half PPR also devalues what I call the PPR scam receivers. Those receivers who most of their productivity comes from high volume of receptions. So your Christian Kirk types, your Wan'Dale Robinson types. They're going to get a lot of receptions. They're going to be kind of low average depth of targets, kind of close to the line of scrimmage. Not a lot of deep threats, not a lot of touchdown upside. These guys are going to be capped off at like 4 or 5 touchdowns a year. Those players are very devalued in this in the half PPR format. So you need to understand that. It's very important as well. And your tight ends need to score touchdowns. Obviously, you've got 2 elite ones this year, we believe, in Trey McBride and Brock Bowers, because they get a ton of receptions. They get enough reception that they can offset not necessarily scoring a bunch of touchdowns, because neither one were big touchdown scorers last year. But George Kittle was the third tight end who was right there with them. I think he was 9 points behind Bowers. I think he outscored Trey McBride last year because he scored touchdowns, and Bowers and McBride didn't. So, we're hoping that we'll get some touchdown regression from Bowers and McBride, but Kittle he's very valuable because he can get you a good volume of receptions, not as much as the elites necessarily, but he also gives you touchdowns, and that's very important. Your tight ends need to be able to score touchdowns because they don't get that many receptions in any given week. Sometimes they'll spike, but it's not really a consistent thing. So your tight ends need to be able to score touchdowns. Then again, in full PPR, that's your DraftKings format. Now, DraftKings also has, again, it's like their DFS scoring. They also have 300-point bonuses, 100-yard rushing receiving bonuses. So that's important, but it's those things that aren't really necessarily predictable, and they'll kind of even out through the season. But just be aware of those as well. Again, receptions are your priority. So again, it's kind of the opposite of the half PPR. Your Wan'Dale Robinsons, your Christian Kirks, guys like that. They become more valuable in full PPR because they can get a high volume of receptions. They can get 8, 9, 10 catches a game, and that becomes very valuable. They give you a very valuable floor. So much, much more valuable in the full PPR than they are in half PPR, even though they don't score a ton of touchdowns. And again, the higher scoring of the full PPR kind of devalues the importance of touchdowns. So however you want to play it, if you prefer half PPR, if you prefer full PPR, whatever you're used to. Obviously, there's sites that do both, but understand that how you draft in these different sites is going to be dependent on the scoring. So again, you can't just, one player may be more valuable on one site than the other, maybe less valuable on the other one site than the other. You have to take these things into account. Also in full PPR, your satellite backs become more valuable. Your running backs who catch a lot of passes. To go old school with a Danny Woodhead, a Darren Sproles, something like that. these players become much more valuable, even though they're probably not going to score a lot of touchdowns again, because they are going to get a lot of receptions, and that's going to buffer their point total, give you a higher floor during the season. So they can become much more valuable in that full PPR format than half PPR. And then your elite pass catching tight ends are massive advantages. So your Brock Bowers, your Trey McBrides, the guys we were just talking about, they become huge advantages. They're legitimately, they can be first round candidates, or candidates to be taken in the first round, because it's so important that you get that reception, and they separate themselves so much. It's basically, like, think of Travis Kelce a few years ago when he was as double as valuable as the next highest scoring tight end. It's a similar thing, just with more competition between the top two. So those elite pass catching tight ends, very important and legitimate first round candidates in full PPR. And one other thing to remember is this is best ball. So scoring distribution is more important than your raw point total. So think about it this way. If you have two players that each score 100 points, and one scores, say, 6 points a week for 16, 17 weeks, and one scores 25 points a week, but only in over 4 weeks, that player that scores 25 points a week over 4 weeks is going to be much more valuable, because that other player who scores 6 points a week is hardly ever going to hit your lineup. There may be a few weeks here and there where you get a zero at the bottom of your lineup, and that helps, don't get me wrong, but it's not difference making to where that 25 points over 4 weeks, that player is hitting your lineup every time he scores. And you don't care about the zeros because you're going to have other receivers to take their place of those zeros. So you don't care about that. That's fine. It's best ball. You're always getting your highest scoring player. So, a player that scores 100 points via 16 weeks of 16 points, that player may only give you 12, 18, 24 points, right? There's only a few weeks he's actually going to hit your lineup, to where that 25 point over 4 week player, that those 100 points that he scores are all going to hit your lineup. So that's very important. Very important that to understand that distribution of scoring is much more important than raw point total. So something to keep in mind. And that's where that's kind of the genesis of the better in best ball receiver. Your Marquez Valdez-Scantlings, going back to like Deshaun Jackson was the kind of the prototype for this. A guy who could go, in any given week could go like, 6 catches, 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, but the next week could do nothing, right? 2 catches for 12 yards. And like in a managed league, that's a nightmare, right? Because those 2 catch for 12 yards weeks, those will kill you. But you never know when the spike weeks are going to happen. Best ball doesn't matter, right? You just always automatically get the highest scoring players in your lineup each week. So again, be very cognizant of the types of players, the types of scoring, how they score. It really affects their value and where you should draft them. So let's talk about how you're going to approach the draft, whether you're going to do it as a portfolio or you're going to do it as a dart throw. And what I mean by dart throw is that you're probably only going to do, you're only do a few drafts. You're not going to do like a bunch of entries. You're not going to max out a tournament, maybe a small tournament or something like that, but you're not going to max out, Best Ball Mania with 150 entries at $25 a crack, right? You can't do that. Even I can't do that, right? Unless I win a few baseball dailies or something like that to kind of plump up my bankroll. But I don't necessarily have $4,000 laying around to kick into a tournament like this and let sit for 6 months until until we get resolution at the end of the season. So there's nothing wrong with doing the dart throw approach. So if you are doing it that way, just go get your guys, right? And get, take them at an appropriate time, but get the players that you like. This should be fun. This has got to be fun. This is this isn't a very high expected value enterprise. So make it fun. If you're going to draft, you're going to spend the time to draft, you're going to put the money into it. Make it fun. Go get your guys, pick some guys that you like, go get them, and build your team around them. That's totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. But you can still build strong, focused, robust lineups. And that's what we're here to teach you about. Now, if you're doing the portfolio strategy like I do, you're going to do a bunch of entries. You're going to max out some of the smaller tournaments. You're going to max out the big tournament. you want to be paying attention to which players you're taking because you want to be able to manage your exposures. So the best advice I can give you if you're drafting a portfolio, draft like you're right, but build your portfolio with humility. So what do I mean by that? In each individual draft should be its own thing, and you should draft each draft should be coherent, it should make sense, and you should draft like you're right, assuming that if I think that Joe Mixon's gonna have a monster year, then I don't want to bother handcuffing him, whoever his backup is, if it's Woody Marks, Dameon Pierce, whoever it is. If I'm taking Joe Mixon, I'm taking him early. I'm banking on him having a big year, so I want to draft according to what I expect to happen. But when I say build with humility, build your portfolio with the understanding that we're going to be wrong about a lot, right? No matter how much you think, how sure you are of something, you're going to be wrong, and you're going to be wrong a lot. We all are, right? This is a volatile game. Injuries happen. Coaching decisions have so much to do with it. There's so much behind the scenes that we just can't know. That's the fun of it, right? It's kind of really unpredictable. We're trying to predict things that are unpredictable. That's where the fun comes in. So that's why you have to have humility. You have to say, I'm not necessarily going to be right. So I'm not going to draft the same players every time. I'm not going to draft the same players. I'm not going to build the same team every time. I want to have different structures. I want to have different builds. I want to keep my exposures to different players in different kind of combinations, because I want to try and cover as much as I possibly can if I'm going to draft a large number of teams. So again, draft like you're right, build with humility. Best advice I can give if you're building a portfolio. Another important thing is to let your draft position determine your early round exposures, especially your first round players. So what I'm talking about here is, let's say you have Saquon Barkley as your 5th ranked player. That's fine. That's probably perfectly reasonable. But if you only draft him if you're going to draft the other players that you have ranked ahead of him every time, you're never going to get Saquon Barkley. You're going to have zero exposure because he always gets drafted before almost always gets drafted before pick 5. So you have to, again, that's where you're drafting or building with humility. Say, sometimes if I want to get some exposure to him, I'm going to have to take him with a number 2 pick. I'm going to have to take him with a number 3 pick. So that's perfectly fine. Even though, you may think you're passing on a better player, it doesn't always work out like that. So there's a lot, just think about last year, how the first round just didn't work out the way we wanted it to. If you think about it, Christian McCaffrey got hurt. Tyreek Hill was basically a complete bust. The 2 Jets guys, Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, were both going in the first round. Neither one of them turned out real well. A.J. Brown got hurt. Puka Nacua got hurt. There were a lot of injuries. I'll confess it. I was drafting a lot of Marvin Harrison in the first round. I had a lot of 12 picks last year. I took a lot of Marvin Harrison. Again, I needed to draft with more humility. I needed to be less sure of myself. And the converse of this is true as well, right? If you have CeeDee Lamb ranked as your second best player, that could be right. It's a perfectly reasonable take. But if you always take him with your second pick, with your third pick, then you're going to be missing out again on the Breece Hall or the Bijan Robinsons, the Jahmyr Gibbs, the Justin Jeffersons, the other players who go in that area. So again, big picture, let your draft position determine your early round exposures. And then, the farther you get into the draft, the more, kind of variance is going to take over, the more the tree is going to kind of branch out a little bit, and things are going to be, so you can take different paths, right? But again, early in the draft, especially the first round, don't necessarily have to be a slave to ADP, but, kind of keep that in mind. Keep your portfolio balanced with those early round players, because these are players that you're going to want exposure to. Like, the first round is strong this year. Like, you can get the depth of the first round is really good. I don't have a particular position that I prefer. I don't have a draft number that I prefer, because I think all of them are strong. There's strong players throughout the entire first round. There's good players at the beginning of the early second round. So yeah, I don't care what draft position I get. So I want to have flat exposures to all the players in the first round. So again, let your draft position. Hopefully you get an even spread of draft positions, so you can get exposure to all. Get flat exposure to all these players, but it doesn't necessarily always happen. I've got right. I'm probably about 40 drafts in, and man, I'll tell you, I've got a lot of picks between 8 and 10. I've probably got it feels like about half half my drafts are the 108, and I'm fine with that. There's good players there. I don't mind that at all. I would just like more exposure to different draft positions. That's all I'm saying. And it'll come, right? We're very early in the process. We're only a couple weeks in, a little over 2 weeks into the Best Ball Mania season, the main post-draft Best Ball season. So don't worry about that. It'll come. You'll get some exposure. Like I think I've only had one pick so far, one Jamar Chase share. I've done an entire. I've maxed out the Schnauzer draft on Schnauzer contest on Underdog. I don't have a one pick. I have no Jamar Chase. So if I'm going to win that contest, it's going to have to be without Jamar Chase. But that happens, especially with those small. It's a 20 max entry tournament. So that's going to happen, right? When you have a small number of entries, your draft exposure, your draft position exposures are not necessarily going to even out. The law of large numbers doesn't necessarily apply. So that's just the way it goes. But when you're doing a big portfolio, if you're going to have 200, 300, 400 drafts throughout the season, your draft positions are going to even out. And then you can use that to let your early round exposures kind of even out. So before we go on, let's talk about our partners at Fast Draft. Fast Draft, a little different than Underdog, a little different than DraftKings, but the uniqueness is very cool. Shorter drafts, faster drafts. You've only got 6 players, 20-second clocks, so you fire through these drafts real quick. You'd sit there, just fire off draft after draft after draft. And the coolest thing is there are drafts that you are not going to find anywhere else. All rookie drafts. If you're like me, you've got a bunch of dynasty rookie drafts going on right now, and you've done your research on all these prospects, go jam into it. Check out the Origins draft, which is all rookies. Very cool, very fun. No positional requirements. You can just take the ones you like. So you can load up on a couple. If you think a couple quarterbacks are going to be starters this year, go get those quarterbacks. It's a very, very fun format, very different. And you get even the multipliers, which is a cool thing that you can set before the season. You don't even set them now, right? You just draft the players you like. And then once the season's ready to start, go back in and reset your multipliers and see, which players you like better, which players you don't like. Another thing is they've got IDP drafts. There is nowhere else you're going to find IDP drafts in Best Ball except on Fast Draft. So we love that here at IDP Plus. Check out the IDP Plus feed. You'll see a lot of us posting on Twitter, on Blue Sky, that we're jumping into an IDP draft on Fast Draft. So keep that in mind. If you're kind of scrolling Twitter and you want to stay away from the doom of the day, check out the IDP Plus feed, because sometimes we'll be posting that we're jumping into an IDP draft. A lot of fun draft those. And if you want to get into the streets of Fast Draft, you can do. They've got kind of free drafts, so you can kind of learn how to draft on Fast Draft. But if you want to make a deposit, use the code Plus Joel. That's PLUS Joel, JOEL. You get a deposit match of up to $50. So thanks to our friends at Fast Draft, and check them out, because it is the fastest way to get drafting. All right. Now, let's talk about building your roster in Best Ball. Stacking and correlation. This is something you're going to hear a lot about in these big mega multi-entry tournaments. So what is stacking? What is correlation? So stacking basically means you're taking multiple players from the same team, because if one does well, it means the other is doing well. So think about it like a quarterback with a wide receiver. If the quarterback does well, the wide receiver is probably going to do pretty well, especially if he's a prominent player. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. If Joe Burrow has a good season, Jamar Chase is going to have a good season. And the inverse is true. If Jamar Chase is really good, if he's the number one player, like we're drafting him to be, he's the number one player in almost every draft right now, then Joe Burrow's going to have a pretty good year. So it's just that kind of yin yang back and forth. If one's good, the other one almost has to be good. It's one less thing you have to get right? If you know that if you're again, draft like you're right. I'm taking Jamar Chase. I think he's going to be the best player. That means that his quarterback is going to have to be really good. I don't need to go find a different quarterback and hope that he's good. I don't need to worry about if Baker Mayfield's good, or if Brock Purdy's good, or if Jared Goff's good. I'll go get Joe Burrow, put him with Jamar Chase. And since I know I'm drafting like I'm right, I know that Jamar Chase is going to be the best player in the league this year. that means his quarterback's got to be pretty good as well. So that's stacking. That's kind of the gist of stacking. You're correlating your players. You're correlating your team. You want to do this on high scoring teams. You want to do this with high scoring players. And you can also do, you can do what's called a back stack, where you take the quarterback and you take someone, later in the draft who just happens to be on the same team as that quarterback. Just, for that kind of correlation, it just makes more sense than just drafting a random player off of different teams. And one other thing that this does is it keeps you from getting boxed out in the playoffs. So these mega multi-entry tournaments, they obviously have a playoff structure where you're in a pod, and it can, you get to the final. You're lucky enough to get to the final. You're talking about a 500 player, 600 player, 800 player pod, something like that. Now, say you have Joe Burrow by himself, right? You got naked Joe Burrow. If Joe Burrow throws 3 touchdown passes to Jamar Chase, you have no chance, right? Because you got boxed out by all the other teams that have the Burrow Chase combination if you don't have Chase as well. So it's a way to keep yourself from getting boxed out. Now, that it doesn't necessarily mean that Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow's the only way to do it. It could be T. Higgins, it could be Mike Gesicki, but it gives you an option. It gives you a way to not get boxed out in those large player finals, because there's going to be a lot of overlap in these players. They get to a final, so you've got to be able to keep yourself kind of in the mix with those top teams. And then there's game correlation. This really only matters in playoff leagues. Like if you're doing a week 1 through 18, or week 1 through 17, just total points thing. This game correlation doesn't really matter. But in these playoff tournaments, this is what we call bringbacks, and it's nice to have. It's not the be all end all, but it's a nice little tiebreaker. In that, if you have, say, a quarterback and a wide receiver, and you expect them to have a high scoring week 17 game in the final, then the other team in that same game is going to have to score to keep up, right? They're going to want to win as well, so they're going to have to kind of put their pedal to the metal. So you draft a Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase stack. Whoever they end up playing week 17, we'll find out soon. The schedule is going to be released this week. You may want to have a player from that team as a bringback, or maybe 2 players from that team. That's what we call a bringback. Just elevates your chances of having that game go off. That game being the kind of game that you want the players from, the highest scoring game of the week. The more players you have in that game, the better off you are. So, that's correlation. Something to think about. Again, stacking is much more important than the kind of game correlation. You want to actively go get stacks. That's really important. Correlation, if there's a tiebreaker, if it's close, you don't want to like it. You may want to pull somebody up half a round to a round to get a stack, kind of later in the draft. You don't necessarily want it, but if you want to pull them up, a couple half a round in front of ADP. Again, the longer you go in the draft, the less ADP matters. So if it's a tiebreaker, that's cool, but don't go out of your way. But again, you want to draft like you're right. Assume that you're going to have big games, big seasons, and big games in the playoffs from your top players, and get players that can bring back will also be in a high scoring game as well. So that is correlation. Now let's talk about different build strategies. Most of these are going to be based around running backs. You've probably heard about zero RB, and did a video on this last year. It's not just taking 0 running backs. Obviously, that's a very bad strategy to not fill a position. But to where you're not drafting running backs until much later than typically everyone else will in your draft. You're talking round 6, round 7, round 8. You're filling up your other positions, your more reliable positions, your singleton positions, your quarterback, your tight end, your wide receivers are just much more generally more reliable. Like last year didn't work out that well, right? For us 0 RB drafters, and I'm one of them. I did a lot of drafts last year, and it was as bad a year as imaginable for 0 RB, right? All the wide receivers got hurt. All the running backs stayed healthy. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, all these guys stayed healthy, played all 17 games, had great seasons. And we, those of us who weren't or zero RB guys primarily didn't get to benefit from it. So rough. Now, obviously, not all my teams are zero RB. I don't draft every team like that. I want to have exposure. Again, I want to have exposure. I want to build my portfolio with humility. But I had very few Saquon Barkley exposures last year. That was a hole in my game. I'm going to fix it this year. But zero, it doesn't mean zero RB is not a viable strategy this year. It could be, we could go back to the way it has been for the last 6-7 years before last year, to where, the running backs kind of run into a lot of injuries. You run into the dead zone running backs who kind of underperform. Doesn't mean just because last year wasn't a good year for it, doesn't mean zero RB is not viable. Still a very viable strategy. But I think it does lead us to maybe pushing more of our teams toward a hero or anchored RB build. That's where you draft one running back early and then kind of fill out your other positions. But you still have that, again, that anchor RB, to that top scoring running back, to kind of anchor your lineup and always have that guy to fall back on. Again, how do you want to build? You want to build your team like you're right. Build your portfolio with humility. That I'm gonna have some zero RB builds. I'm gonna have some hero RB builds. I'm gonna have some robust RB builds. That's the next one. Robust RB, where I draft a bunch of running backs early. I did a draft today where, like, the draft just kept falling toward my first 3 picks were running backs. I hate doing that normally, right? Because you fall so far behind at receiver. But the value in my early picks was at running back, so I just couldn't pass it up. It was it was a team where I took Saquon Barkley. I got him at the number 4 pick, which you normally don't get. Right? We just talked about, he normally goes 2 or 3. And then I got Jonathan Taylor around ADP, but I thought he was the best player on the board. Don't have a lot of exposure to him, so I'm trying to build up my exposures. And then on my next pick, I got Bucky Irving real well past ADP, almost 7 picks past ADP. So didn't want to pass that up. So that sometimes that value, you don't necessarily want to give up, that ADP value just to do a specific build. If the draft falls to you in a certain way, you want to go with it. So robust RB is certainly viable. It leads you to what we call a hyper fragile build, to where if I build something like that, if I get 3 RBs in my first 3 picks, I'm only going to take 1 or 2 more, and then I'm just going to stop. And that's just the way it is. So if I do like a 4 running back build, that's generally referred to as hyper fragile. I'm just assuming that those 4 running backs are going to be enough to get me through the season. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So, but yeah, it's a viable strategy. Let the draft come to you, right? If you're getting if the best player on the board is a running back at each of the first 3, and then I got Jalen Hurts beyond his ADP as well. So now I got a Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley stack. So yeah, my wide receivers on that team, not great. But if I only have to draft 4 or 5 running backs, that means now I can draft 8 or 9 receivers. I drafted Jalen Hurts, so I only need 2 quarterbacks. So now I can really load up on just, the flyer receivers later in the draft. I can load up on those guys, hope they pan out, and good to go. So not the way I typically want to draft, not the way I typically attack a draft or approach a draft. But again, if that value falls to you, don't be afraid to go ahead and take it and build out from there. But again, build logically. Get an elite quarterback, so you only need 2, and then just build out your wide receiver room with a bunch of flyers in the back end. Guys who can have some upside, but maybe have some questions about playing time or something like that. Go get those guys and just jam as many wide receivers as you can. If you don't take your first one until the 5th or 6th round, just build out the back end of your lineup with flyers who can kind of help you cover the position. Let's talk about duplication. And what I mean by that is duplicating your lineup. It's hard to do an exact duplicate of a lineup, right? Again, we talked about the kind of tree of decision making, the tree of the path that you go through a draft. Duping yourself in a season-long no playoff format, that's very bad, right? You're just kind of canceling out your EV, your expected value of each team. If if you get the exact same team, then right? Only one of them can win. So you just have as fewer chances to actually win the tournament. So it's kind of a negative EV play. Not as bad in these mega multi-entry playoff leagues because you're going to have what's called pod luck. And then we talked about how you're going to put in a pod of 16 players, 12 players. If you get to the final, it's 500, 800 players, something like that. To get through to the final, you have to go through these pods. That's a really tough thing to do. So you'd have two identical teams go through two different pods, and maybe one goes through, maybe one doesn't. So duping yourself, not good. It's negative EP. You don't have like the exact same team. You don't want to have the same combinations of players. But again, season long, it's a very bad thing. In a playoff contest, not the end of the world because like if you have two exact teams, you get two different pods. One's a super high scoring pod. One's a really low scoring pod. That team that maybe has a real good chance to win a week 17. Maybe it doesn't get through the high scoring one, but maybe it does get through a lower scoring one. So you're just giving yourself more chances to kind of, if you have a build that you really like, if you prefer, you're giving yourself more outs to kind of get through to the final. So not the end of the world. Again, it's really hard to just duplicate a lineup because there's so many things that are going to change, even if in the same draft position. Like ADPs are going to swing, different players in the draft. It's going to change quite a bit. So it's really hard to duplicate yourself anyway. And we kind of hit on this earlier, but the further in you get into the draft, the less ADP's average draft position, the less important it is, the less it means. So if you're in pick 120, if you're in pick 130, 140, you're kind of in the middle of the draft, don't be afraid to pull a player up a full round above his ADP. And it doesn't necessarily mean that someone falling a full round is necessarily that great a value. If it doesn't fit your build, don't worry about passing it up. And if you need someone, say you took a Joe Burrow, I'll tell you a story of one. I was doing a draft while I was walking my dog, and the dog was doing his business. And in that particular draft, my turn came up while I was taking care of that, and I got auto drafted into Joe Burrow, well past 80. It was almost a round past ADP. I didn't want to take Joe Burrow at that point. I had no Jamar Chase. I had no T. Higgins. So I took a naked Joe Burrow. That's kind of a bad thing. I don't necessarily. Joe Burrow's not a running quarterback. He's not going to score on his own. So I didn't necessarily want, but it's not the end of the world. But I need to find a stack partner. I don't want to go into a week 17 final with Joe Burrow by himself again because I'm going to get boxed out by the Burrow Higgins, Burrow Chase combinations. So that's a place where I want to target like a Mike Gesicki or a backup running back, whatever. So then it's totally fine to kind of pull up a Mike Gesicki around maybe two. If that's the guy you really need to get through, that's what you really need for your build. Don't be afraid to pull up a player later in the, Mike Gesicki goes in the 150s, 160s. I don't even know what his 80, maybe 170, something like that. Don't be afraid if that player is the player that you need and is really the only player that you can really kind of count on being a functional stack partner. If it's what you need for your build, don't be afraid to pull that player up. Don't worry about ADP, especially later in the round. Again, early in the draft, you don't want to be pulling players from 12 to 1 or 14 to 2, something like that. You want to stay flat with your exposures. But the later you get, the less ADP means. It's a guide to see, okay, whereabout is this player going to be drafted? Can I wait another pick before I have to take him, or is he going to go? Does he typically go in between these two picks? So use ADP as a tool, not as a rule. That's what I like to say. So that's it. If you've got any other build strategies that you like, drop them in the comments. Always love to see comments on these videos. Do me a favor, like, subscribe. So much cool stuff going on here at the channel. So much going on this particular channel on the IDP Plus Bestball show. We're going to be doing a schedule release video as soon as the schedule drops this week. Second annual schedule release spectacular. We'll be talking about the week 17 correlations. We'll be talking about the bye weeks. See how many of my drafts get wiped out because I have two quarterback builds and they're both on the same bye week. That's always fun. So check out the channel. So much cool stuff going on. Especially check out IDP Plus, the website, where you can see all these videos, all these articles, all the tools. So much cool stuff going on there. And before we go, if you're into fantasy football, and if you're watching this, you probably are, cannot recommend highly enough that you take the opportunity and go to the Fantasy Football Expo right here, Canton, Ohio. Every summer, it's August 8th through the 10th. I think I got those dates right. That sounds right. Bob and Nate just do an incredible job. So much fun. The parties, all the drafts, the Kings Classic drafts, the Queens Classic drafts, the IDP Classic drafts. So much cool stuff going on. The Hall of Fame tours. You can meet your favorite expert and talk to them, get one-on-one time. They've got so much cool stuff going on that they haven't done before. So check out thefantasyfootballexpo.com. Get your tickets and plan your time right here in Canton, Ohio for the weekend of August 8th through 10th. That's it for the show. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, like, subscribe, check out the feed, keep your eye on the feed. We're going to be doing a best ball draft right here. So if you want to follow along, see my process going through a draft, you can be able to check that out. And again, we'll be having later this week, we'll be dropping the schedule reaction show, so talking about all things schedule and how it relates to best ball. So that's a lot of fun. Just the schedule is fun. The schedule dropping is fun. So, and it's much more important to best ball than it is, say, a regular season long fantasy league. So check that out, and we will see you next time. Thanks for checking out the show. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheJoelWirth and on Blue Sky, same handle. Thank you for checking out the show, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.